Once upon a time, in a small and peaceful neighborhood, there lived a young boy named Ethan. Next door to Ethan's house, there lived an elderly woman named Mrs. Thompson. She was a kind-hearted woman with a warm smile and a heart full of love. One sunny afternoon, while Ethan was playing in his backyard, he noticed Mrs. Thompson sitting on her porch, looking a bit lonely. Curiosity sparked within him, and he decided to approach her. As they began to talk, Ethan learned that Mrs. Thompson had lost her husband many years ago and her children had moved away to distant places. She spent most of her days alone, and her heart longed for companionship. Touched by her story, Ethan made a promise to Mrs. Thompson that he would visit her every single day, no matter what. Mrs. Thompson's eyes filled with tears of joy, and she thanked Ethan with a grateful heart. From that day forward, Ethan kept his word and visited her daily. They would sit on her porch, talking about life, sharing stories, and creating unforgettable memories. As the years went by, Ethan grew older and busier. His days became filled with school, extracurricular activities, and spending time with his friends. Days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months. Little by little, Ethan started to forget his promise to Mrs. Thompson. Meanwhile, Mrs. Thompson's health began to decline, and she spent more and more time confined to her bed. She missed the sound of Ethan's laughter and the warmth of his presence. Loneliness started to creep into her heart, and she longed to see him one last time. One fateful day, as Ethan was passing by Mrs. Thompson's house, he noticed a gathering of people outside. Confused, he approached the crowd and learned the heartbreaking news that Mrs. Thompson had passed away. His heart sank, and a wave of guilt washed over him. He realized that he had broken his promise, and it was now too late to make it right. Ethan's regret was overwhelming, and he couldn't help but blame himself for not prioritizing his relationship with Mrs. Thompson. He realized that life had gotten in the way, and he had lost sight of what truly mattered, keeping his word and valuing the relationships he had. In honor of Mrs. Thompson, Ethan attended her funeral and spoke about the beautiful bond they had shared. He shared stories of her kindness and the impact she had made on his life. Ethan vowed to himself that he would never make the same mistake again, that he would cherish the people in his life and keep his promises, no matter how busy life became. From that day forward, Ethan carried the weight of his broken promise as a reminder of the importance of valuing the relationships we have. He visited Mrs. Thompson's grave regularly, sharing updates about his life and seeking forgiveness for his negligence. As Ethan grew older, he became a man of his word. He kept his promises and made time for his loved ones. He understood that life was a delicate balance between responsibilities and nurturing the connections that brought joy and meaning to his life. In the end, Ethan's broken promise became a lesson learned, a lesson that taught him the importance of keeping our word and valuing the relationships we have. And though he couldn't turn back time, he vowed to honor Mrs. Thompson's memory by living a life filled with love, compassion, and the fulfillment of his promises.